Well, I feel like it's been a long time since we made a video. I almost forgot how to do this, it seems like, but we have been extremely busy. We obviously got married and we've had tons of family in town, and now we're back to it again. But today I'm gonna take you into the garden and show you what we've got growing, because we have a ton of stuff that's going crazy and fruiting right now. So let's go check it out. For our wedding, which we actually had right here on the farm, I'm sure we're gonna get some footage out to you. We ended up building this arch, which was for our wedding, but we had plans to always put it right in front of this gate here. So we like it a lot, and we took a poll to see what you guys thought we should grow on it. I think I had like clematis or grapes or hardy kiwi, I think, and I think the popular one was grapes. So we already have grapes in the fence line, but we'll probably add some grapes on this, and then I might do some hardy kiwi on it as well. But we really love the arch. It's a really nice opening piece to our garden. Should be really enjoyable to pick some grapes off the top. As you can obviously tell, this black stuff we got behind us, that is landscape fabric. And this landscape fabric has been a game changer. We are both enjoying the garden so much. It's so beautiful to be able to walk through here and actually see all of our crops and all of the food that we're growing in here. Last year's garden was terrible. The weeds took over and it was just miserable. So this year, the landscape fabric has been wonderful. I know people have opinions about it because it's plastic and whatnot, but this stuff we're gonna be using for years and years and years, and it's a game changer. Last year was actually our first year gardening. This is our second year gardening, and we've done a lot of things different than this year than we did last year. Last year, we kind of grew a ton of stuff that we honestly don't even eat, like zucchini. We don't really eat zucchini, but we planted a ton of zucchini and did that for a lot of things. Just planted things because we thought it would be fun, and it was interesting, but honestly, it was kind of a waste of space, a waste of energy for us to grow things that we don't normally eat on the daily basis. So this year's garden is all about us trying to preserve as much as we possibly can and growing things that we actually eat on a daily basis. One thing we really want to do is get our fruits in as early as possible. So we have a lot of blackberry growing in here. You can see we have the thornless blackberries. We've also got some raspberry growing down on the fence line itself. And then over here on this fence line, we have some grapes growing right here. The majority of our garden is in landscape fabric. One thing we wanted to do was actually build some raised beds. So we have 4 raised beds, and these are more for crops that are perennial and they're not gonna be torn up every single year. So right here we've got some early glow strawberries, and then we have some ever-bearing strawberries in the back there that we've been munching on. They did okay this year, but I'm sure next year they'll be a lot better. In this raised bed, we've got all of our herbs. So we've got English thyme, we've got rosemary, we have sage, and then we also have oregano. And then we have some dill in there, which obviously that'll die back, but we just tossed it in there for the meantime. And these have done okay. With the wedding and everything, we weren't really able to get out here and water a whole lot, especially like hand watering. I'll explain our watering system for the landscape fabric area, but in this area, we noticed that the raised beds dry out really, really fast. We probably should have put some mulch down here, but they're all staying alive. They're just not very big, sadly. And honestly, the same thing applies to our mint raised bed. We did put some plastic underneath this to try and contain the mint in this one raised bed, but it's growing in there, and it smells really good, but there's not a ton in there. So I'm hoping next year we'll be a little bit better about watering and these things can grow a little bit better. And then in our last raised bed, we actually grew some peanuts. So I don't know if they grow really quickly or whatnot, but they're growing pretty well, it seems like. We'll see if we get a harvest out of it. I know this has a really long growing time in the season, so I think it's like 120 days is what you need. So we'll see if we get anything out of it, but it's a fun little experiment. So we threw those in some raised beds as well, so that way we can easily rip them out of there and harvest. If you didn't know, you can actually grow potatoes in buckets, and we grew potatoes a few different ways this year because last year's potato harvest was just terrible. The potato bugs attacked our potato plants and basically killed all of the leaves so that there was just a single stem left, and we had some potatoes, but it really wasn't much. So this year, I will tell you, we did so much better. This year's harvest is going to be way better once these plants die back. But We have some buckets here. I think there's about 5 of them, with a few different potato varieties in there as well. Mostly red and Yukon Gold potatoes, but I'm really excited to see how these work out, because when it's ready to harvest, you can just flip this over and the potatoes all dump out. So we should have a pretty good potato harvest from them. They're growing really well. We also grew potatoes in the ground. We have Yukon Gold and then red potatoes in the back. And one interesting thing that I noticed when we were growing these potatoes is that the potato bugs actually love the Yukon Gold plants. I don't ever pick any off of the red, which is super interesting. So the red potatoes must just not be appetizing to them, or at least the leaves aren't appetizing to them, because those little potato bugs, as those little larvae, as they grow up, they'll actually eat off the leaves of the plant. So that was interesting to find out. So we might be growing a lot more red potatoes, and maybe here in this you'll grow some more too. But these things are actually just starting to die back, and I'm excited to see how they're growing. I've checked a couple of them. We definitely have potatoes growing in there, so it'll be really exciting to see how many we get, because we planted a lot of potatoes this year. We had a little bird decide to build a nest. I almost weed whacked those little guys, so thankfully I saw it and created a little nest there for them. And in here we've got our sweet corn. That's all we grew this year because we didn't want any cross-pollination or anything, and we put all 3 different varieties 2 weeks apart from each other. So we have some serendipity corn right here in the front, and then right here we've got some peaches and cream corn, which is already starting to talus, and we're starting to get some cobs that are starting to grow. And then right in here we have an ambrosia corn, which I guess is like a hybrid corn, and this is the first one we planted, so we're actually getting some pretty good sized cobs already. And so we got our corn here, we got our potatoes right here in this row, and right between those we decided to plant a bunch of pumpkins. And we have some sugar pie pumpkins that we're going to use for, making pumpkin pie and whatnot. We usually like make it into a puree and then freeze it into bags and then use it for Thanksgiving and stuff. And then we also have some jack-o'-lantern pumpkins, of course, so that way we can, decorate the house. These pumpkin plants are still pretty young. It wasn't too long ago that we planted them, so they're not really getting any pumpkins on them yet, but I see some flowering in there. And right next to our garden, while I'm over here on this side next to the corn, we have our cows. So they get all of our scraps. If we have like lettuce or cucumber or all sorts of things, we'll take it and throw it to them so they can eat some of it, and they usually go crazy for it. And one thing that we actually didn't plant, we have some elderberry growing in here. So if you can't tell, this is elderberry plant, and it grows like crazy. I mean, it just comes up and shoots up every single year. I weed whack it sometimes and it just comes right back. So this is basically the dividing line. Right here we've got cardboard and then wood chips, and then we did some hay and some straw, and you can see it's seeded out pretty good. So there's a lot of grass that's growing in there, so I have to weed whack that quite a bit. And then we have all our in-ground planting stuff without landscape fabric, like our pumpkins, or like our potatoes, our pumpkins, and then our corn, of course. So right here is a big long row of cucumbers, and I grew a ton of cucumbers because I wanted a bunch of pickles, and we just like snacking on cucumbers. It's a really good snack, and even just walking around the garden, you can just eat one. It's really nice. So we have tons of cucumber. These are both just pickling cucumbers. One's a national pickling cucumber, and then the other one's like a Boston pickling cucumber, I believe. So those are growing like crazy. We've harvested quite a bit. Let's see if there's any growing on there. I just love this landscape fabric because all you see is the plant. There's no weeds, and it grows so well on that landscape fabric. You'll see when we go look at our beans and whatnot how incredibly clean our beans are. Last year when we were growing on dirt and didn't have landscape fabric, our beans and cucumbers and things, they would get little spots on them, and bugs would eat them really easily. The bugs really don't enjoy being on top of this. They like being underneath the landscape fabric. So if you pull up this landscape fabric, all you're gonna see is worms at the very top, and they absolutely love that, but they don't really like being on top, which helps our pest control a little bit. This right here is Ashlyn's attempt at growing flowers for our wedding, but sadly they didn't take off until after our wedding. So they're very beautiful ornaments for our garden, and they're gorgeous. So I think we have some marigold, there's some alyssum, there's some more marigold, and then there's more alyssum there. I believe that's alyssum. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but we have quite a bit that's growing, and there's even more on the back side that I'll show you. But these flowers are gorgeous. It's kind of nice that she can come out here and pick it and have a nice fresh bouquet on the dinner table for us. And another new thing to us is trellising. So we didn't trellis last year, other than like our tomatoes and stuff, but we didn't do a big cattle panel trellis like this last year. And on one side we have cucumbers. They're pretty young. They're a lot younger than the cucumbers over there, so they haven't grown up like crazy. And honestly, they don't seem to be growing as well as those ones for some reason. But it's always interesting trying new things, so we'll see how they do. And then on the other side, we actually have lima beans. Lima beans are those big, huge white beans. I love those things in salads and whatnot, and so we're trellising those up on the cattle panel. You can just start to see some of the little pods that are popping out, but nothing crazy yet. Those are pretty young too compared to some of our other beans. In this bushy area is a whole lot of stuff. Mostly beans. So right here behind me we have provider beans, and these things are growing great. These beans are delicious. These are our green beans. The rest of our beans here are actually going to be left on the pod to dry because they're going to be bagged beans, so that way they're a little easier to preserve. But these ones right here are actually getting canned. With last year's garden, we tried to do everything ourselves. We tried to grow everything from seed and do it all on our own. We weren't wanting to go buy starts from anybody. We thought we were cheating ourselves, or we weren't true gardeners if we did that. And this year, my goal was a little different, to get everything I wanted in the ground, and if I didn't succeed at growing it by seed, I was gonna go buy it from somebody else. And so that's exactly what we did. So we had a few things in our garden that we decided to get starts from, and one of them is actually right behind me. Back here we have a bunch of cantaloupe, and last year we tried cantaloupe from seed, and for some reason it just didn't do well, but we had started it in ground. These cantaloupes were actually grown by a local Amish farmer down the road from us, and we bought it from him and his little greenhouse. And these things have done so well. So we have a few things in this garden that we actually didn't personally start ourselves. And you know, I don't even care about my pride. I'm gonna humble myself because not everything is gonna be successful in this garden. And the most important thing is that we feed ourselves and we don't have to go to the supermarket. So if I have to go spend a little bit of money at somebody else's greenhouse, so be it. But these things are taking off like crazy. And this is a big reason why we left space between the cucumber and the cantaloupe, and then also our watermelons, which are still a little small, because we wanted them to trellis out as much as possible and have room to walk between them. And we've got some pretty good sized cantaloupes in here. I mean, we're gonna have a ton of cantaloupe. We're gonna be eating cantaloupe like crazy. And in that same row, we now have watermelon, which we actually did start ourselves from seed. We planted these watermelon seeds in there, and you can see that not all of them took. Sometimes we've got some weeds that are growing in here, and it's as easy as that to pull them, and then we toss them back on the landscape fabric and they die. So we're gonna have a bunch of watermelon, a bunch of cantaloupe, and it just looks so beautiful on our landscape fabric. So right in here on the same row on the back end, we have more flowers. And we have some of the coolest looking flowers I've ever seen. I've never seen flowers that have multiple different colors like that. And so right here we've got some moss rose. This stuff is just gorgeous. We've also got some zinnias, which I guess is what was over at the other place. And back here on the back end, I actually decided to till this little area up back behind the landscape fabric. And if you can't tell, those are all sunflowers. And we have a few other flowers in there. I'm not sure if they actually took or not, but we'll see if they pop up. So that should be gorgeous here in the next month or two. And this next row right here, like I said, is all beans. So we actually have some more green beans right in here. The joy of having your own garden. You get to stop and eat green beans whenever you want. We have pinto beans in here. We have red kidney beans in here. And then the majority of this is actually black beans, which are actually growing very well. And these are the most mature beans we have in here. And it's so crazy that we already have stuff that's starting to die back. Like some of these beans are starting to die a little bit and get a little brown. And then obviously our potatoes are starting to die back a little bit. But We have a couple things that are loving this hot weather. It's been 90 degrees lately, and these 2 rows right here, they love the heat. So right in here, we've got a ton of peppers. We have a bunch of different kinds in there. Our local Amish gardener that we bought starts from had some of these, and that's why that's a question mark, because he had no idea. So he gave them to him for free, and they're actually jalapenos. So you got to be careful when you're biting into this, because you never know what you're gonna get. So we've got quite a few jalapeno peppers. And then this next one is actually a King Arthur, which is more like your traditional bell pepper. And these are looking really good. Again, oh yeah. I always love walking through the garden because you can always get a snack. And the best part is, because we're on the landscape fabric, there's really no need to wash these. Everything is so clean. We do wash everything before we can it, but just being able to come in and bite into something and knowing that it wasn't laying in the dirt is a huge thing. This next pepper we have is actually called a Trictu, and the reason for that is because it's a jalapeno pepper. It tastes like a jalapeno, but it doesn't have spice. So if you love the taste of jalapenos, get yourself some Trictu peppers and you can have that without the spice. And I'll prove that right now. Tastes like a jalapeno, but as you can tell, I'm not dying. No spice. I feel like instead of a garden tour, this is you guys watching me sweat my butt off on this landscape fabric in this heat and eating all the food I can. The next pepper we've gotten here is actually banana peppers. This is a sweet banana pepper. We love to pickle banana peppers. We love them on just about everything. They're super delicious. And those are growing so well. And then the last pepper we actually have in here is just a regular bell pepper that we grew last year and we're growing again this year. This is, you know, pretty much like the King Arthur. The next thing we've got growing in here is probably one of my favorite things to grow, and that's tomatoes. These guys grow really well and they're kind of fun to prune and you know, prune them in the way that you want them and trellis them. We've really enjoyed it. So we've actually used a T-post and a Florida weave system for all of our tomato plants to trellis them. And this has worked incredibly well. These tomato plants stay up so well, and it's kind of nice. You can move them and put them in the direction you want them to. So right in here, we've got some beefsteak. These are gonna be for, you know, putting onto our sandwiches, for slicing tomatoes. Those are growing so well. And we've got some cherry tomatoes, which are actually starting to ripen. And I think we've even got one for me to eat. Oh yeah, that's good. These cherry tomatoes grow so fast and they grow so tall. It's gonna be even taller than this trellis. They're eventually gonna have to just hang over the side in a minute. Now we've got some Armada orange tomatoes. These things are like flipping pumpkins. These grow so big. You can see down in here, we've got one that is just huge. And those are growing very well. These are very tasty tomato. If you want something a little different, this one's got some blossom end rot, sadly, but if you want something that tastes a little different, the Armada orange are super delicious. And for the majority of what we grew was San Marzano tomatoes all the way down. Beautiful Italian tomato. Gorgeous. These are a very interesting tomato, but they grow pretty large. So you can see they're not a very tall tomato plant. And we've pruned them a little bit, but we haven't pruned them like we prune our major indeterminate tomatoes, like right here, which is our Armada, cherry, beefsteak. But we have pruned them a little bit. So, and then in between a lot of our tomatoes, our tomato plants that didn't do well, we decided to uproot them and we planted some basil. And that just smells good. So our basil is growing great. We're gonna be able to use that when we're canning tomato sauces. And San Marzano, and all the way down here is when we start to get into our Roma tomatoes. So these are the determinate tomatoes, and of course we have basil in between, but these are growing so well. Look at those. These are gonna be wonderful for making tomato sauce. That's basically what all of these Roma tomatoes all the way down, and then San Marzano tomatoes, all of these are going to be used for canning tomato sauces, tomato soups. You know, we're gonna make some chili, things like that. Beautiful, beautiful. Last year we didn't make nearly enough tomato sauce, which is why we have an entire 100-foot row of tomatoes, plus like maybe another third of a row of tomatoes, because we're trying to have an abundance of everything we need to can, just in case, you know, some things get blossom end rot, or, you know, bugs get to them and things like that. We have the redundancy, so that way we can just have as much as we need, and if we have extra, we feed it to the pigs, the cows, the chickens, all the livestock, and sometimes even the dogs get a snack depending on what it is. And this right here was the first row of crops that we planted this year. You can see we've got a bunch of onions, and you can see there's some spaces. We've already harvested some of them have fallen over. You can see like this one right here has already fallen over. Nice big onion. But sadly, what we've noticed is right here we planted a bunch of bulbs. Last year we did bulbs too, and we had an issue with rot. And again, we're having an issue with the bulbs rotting as well. So we'll see if we're ever gonna do this again. Thankfully, we grew more onions further down that we grew from seed, and those are doing so much better. So if you're wondering about going bulb to seed, I would recommend starting them from seeds, or at least buying ones that were started from seeds. These bulbs are technically a second year onion, and a lot of times they just go to flower, and they also rot like crazy, which is what happened to us last year. So now we know 2 years in a row, probably not gonna do bulbs ever again. And earlier this year, we made a video about our Bootstrap Farmer low tunnel kit with our insect netting, because we have our cole crops in here, which is our cabbage, we have broccoli, and we have cauliflower. And I'm gonna tell you, oh my gosh, what a difference this has made for us right here. And we also spray some BT, which is like an organic, I think it's like a fungicide or something that kills the cabbage worms. And that's what keeps your cole crops from getting those little holes and getting just absolutely destroyed. Nothing's worse than harvesting your broccoli and bringing it inside and tearing it up, and all you see is like 50 different cabbage worms in there. It's so gross, and you have to really clean them off. And this year, we didn't have that problem at all because of this and spraying BT on them. So let's open this up and see what's growing in here. It is like 95 degrees, and it has been for quite a while. And you can see we have a bunch of cabbage growing in here, and this stuff is doing so well. No issues with the heat, doing wonderful. We got these little clips, and that's what we use to clip it back in place, and it keeps the cabbage moth from being able to get there and lay eggs. On this one, we've got a bunch of broccoli. This is actually our second planting of broccoli. We have harvested every bit of broccoli and cauliflower in here in every single one of these spots, and we have actually replanted them. And you can see they're doing incredibly well, even though it is super, super hot out here. I was a little surprised. I was thinking I was gonna have to use the shade cloth a lot more, but we've noticed that just this insect net somehow gives like a little break from the UV rays, and it's been wonderful to use this, and our broccoli's done so well. And so we've harvested tons of broccoli and tons of cauliflower this year, and what we do is we take it inside, we blanch it, and then we freeze it and put it in little freezer bags, and then we just take it out and steam it when we want it for dinner. Last night we had some, it was delicious, and so glad we were able to save some of that. Last year we weren't able to keep any broccoli or cauliflower because it just got destroyed by the cabbage worms. This right here is a bit of a jumbled mess. There's some weeds growing in those holes, but this is actually our garlic, and sadly we did not plant garlic last year in November when we should have. We planted it in like January or February, and it just has not done too well. You can see they are itty bitty. They still taste great, but they didn't do very well. So this year we're definitely gonna plant them in November. And thankfully we have a bunch of garlic left over from the year before that is still good, surprisingly. But garlic harvest this year was kind of meh, wasn't very good. Next up, we've got carrots, and these carrots are growing super well. Let's pull one of these bad boys out of here. Look at that. Tons of carrots in here. You can see we've already harvested quite a bit of carrots. And then our lettuce, We've been harvesting lettuce, we've been cutting it back so it'll regrow. I think it's been trying to go to seed lately because it's getting so warm, but we're still collecting them off. All we do is we pick off the side or we cut it right above the root ball so that way it can regrow. All right, those bees are doing something funny. We can't put that on YouTube. Next up, we've got some red ripper pea on this side, and then we have some black-eyed peas on this side, and these are growing really well. I don't see any pods yet, but they're definitely loving it. You can see they're flowering. These things are doing exceptionally well. We don't really eat a whole lot of peas, but I honestly bought these from a store-bought bag and planted them, and I wanted to see if they did well, and they took off like crazy. So I was talking about how our onions on that side way down there where we just came from have been rotting, but these ones right here that were planted from seed are doing so well. And we actually planted these kind of late in the season, and you can see they're actually doing really, really well. Let's take a closer look. We've had a few that have fallen over and we've harvested, and they were little tiny guys, but you can see right here, this one's pretty good size. These ones are starting to get pretty good size. And honestly, I'm okay with a smaller onion as long as it doesn't rot and it stays and stores well in the house. That's the most important thing to me. So I'm sure these onions right here are gonna do so much better than those onions down there that have been rotting like crazy. We've got some parsley down in here. That smells good. And the very last thing we have on our great big, almost 10,000 square foot garden tour is our celery. Our celery is looking really good, growing well, getting taller by the day. Ashlyn and I were out here the other day and she said, man, I feel like we have so much more room than we have last year, but somehow we're growing more this year than we did last year. And that's exactly how it is. I couldn't tell you why that is. Maybe it's because we don't have a ton of weeds and grass growing between all the rows, so it feels like we have a lot more crop instead of a lot more weeds. But this year, it just seems like we have so much more space and that we could have used up a lot more and planted some things a little tighter. And compared to last year where it felt like we didn't have enough space, everything was being overgrown, we had so many failed crops. And a lot of that is mostly due to what we planted, where we planted, but also the majority of that is because we had this landscape fabric, which we just absolutely love. You know, if you've never had a garden before, or this is your first year gardening, don't get discouraged, because last year I hated gardening. I did not enjoy it. It was constant weeding. It looked a lot like what this little pathway right here next to the fence looks like. And then we would have crops between them and it was just miserable. So this year, I love gardening, and I would really encourage you, especially if you don't have the time. This is lazy gardening at its finest. No mulching, no having to remulch, because you could see in here we should have remulched, but we didn't because we didn't have the time. But for the landscape fabric, it's a little bit of work up front and you're done for the rest of the year. You burn your holes, you plant directly into it. You can even plant seeds directly into it and not have any issues. And if we wanted to, we could actually just bury our potatoes down in the ground and then put landscape fabric on the sides, things like that. We could burn holes for our pumpkins. We could even do the same thing with our corn and plant little rows and then put landscape fabric between them, as long as we had a nice little block for germination. One thing I gotta be on the lookout for this year with our corn is those dang raccoons. Those raccoons seem to love to get into the garden and get the corn. Last year we grew a bunch of field corn, you know, for feed way over, kind of behind where I'm pointing. You have no idea where that is, but over there, way out of the garden. This year we're planting it in the garden, which this is all sweet corn, and we've got our fencing in here, but honestly, a raccoon's gonna get right through that. They don't care. So we'll see. I might have to put up an electric net from Premier One around all of our corn to protect it and electrify it and whatnot. So hopefully the raccoon doesn't get to it. This year's garden's been wonderful, and there's one more thing I forgot to talk about, and that's actually our watering system, which again, along with our landscape fabric, has added to the most lazy garden I've ever had, which has become the most enjoyable garden we've had out of the two we've had. So we already looked at our cucumbers, but you can see there's this black line right here, and this is actually drip tape. And we've got some emitters, which I'll go turn it on, and you can see this will actually start to push some water out of there, and it just drips right at the base of the plant. And you actually have to be very careful with drip tape on a landscape fabric, because even though they say water goes through landscape fabric, it does also run off pretty easily. Water takes the path of least resistance, which is usually sitting on top of this landscape fabric instead of having to work its way through the weaves. And so when you run a drip tape system on this landscape fabric, you have to put it right over and right at the base of all of your plants. And so that's what we've done. Right at the end of our landscape fabric row here, we have a line, a main water line, and then we have little fingers of drip tape that go off into all of our crops all the way down. And sometimes we'll have, you know, if we have 2 rows of crops on one piece of landscape fabric, then we have 2 lines of drip tape. And sometimes, like for our cucumber here, it's just a 1 line of drip tape all the way down. And the joy of it is, when I want to water the garden, all I have to do is come over right here, flip this switch. We've got a little pressure reducing valve, and it goes down into the tube, all the way down into our main line, up, and then off into the fingers. And you'll see that it'll start to drip the water out of there, and it'll drip it right at the base of all the plants, perfectly watering it. And I'll usually leave that on because you want to do a deep water, a really, really deep water. You don't want watering every single day, especially for something like tomatoes. You get a lot of blossom end rot. So you want to deep water 3 times a week for 3 to 4 hours a day in each one of those 3 days. And you can see even for like our potatoes, which I've now turned off because I don't want a bunch of water rotting out those potatoes that are growing. So we'll just let the rain take care of it. But we've put one into the potatoes. We have one for our pumpkins. We have 4 for our corn. And the drip tape is actually a little easier when you're on soil because it'll spread out a little bit better. So you don't have to be right at the base of the plant. But if you're doing it on landscape fabric, you absolutely have to have it right over the holes you burn and right into the landscape fabric. I've seen some videos from some other people that do landscape fabric and drip tape, and they'll say that the drip tape they'll say that the water from the drip tape will go right through the landscape fabric, and that's totally incorrect. It absolutely will not, especially if you're on a slight slope like this. If you're flat, it might, but it will pool in some areas. And we have areas in this landscape fabric where this water will pool up a little bit. So if you're looking for a really easy and lazy way to garden because you have a full-time job, or you're going on vacation in the summer, or you're super busy, whatever it is, like we have been this summer, get yourself landscape fabric, roll it out at the beginning of the year, burn your holes, plant it in, run some drip tape. And the joy of this, run some drip tape to water that system, so that way all you got to do is flick a switch. They even have timers, so you could totally leave your garden alone for months on end if you really wanted to, as long as your timer has battery to turn off and on. That right there is lazy gardening at its finest. I honestly haven't enjoyed doing raised beds, and it's because I haven't had the time to come out and water it so much. And these require a lot more raw water for some reason. They just don't hold it like our clay soils, our ground does out here. This stuff holds water like crazy, and the moisture stays underneath with this landscape fabric. But this year's garden has been awesome, and you can see that we have a ton of stuff growing this year, and I'm so excited for next year already. I've already got plans for next year's garden and what we want to do, because we've already learned so much this year. And I think next year we're gonna plant everything in landscape fabric, including the corn, the potatoes, the pumpkins, everything, because we've just enjoyed it so much. There is one more thing that I figured I'd show you guys that isn't the garden, but it's the orchard. Here's our garden right here, and right over here in this area is our orchard. So we have plum tree, we have some cherry trees, we have a couple peach trees in the back, we have some apple trees, and we actually have some fruit growing on our apple trees, 2 apple trees and 1 pear tree. You can see right there, look at that. Nice, good size apple, not a ton of apples. So we have that apple tree, but then we also have kind of a second orchard, and that's way over here, kind kind of in front of the barns, in front of the house. Right here we have 2 pear trees, and this one actually has some pears on it. Not a ton, but it has a few, and they look like they're growing really well. I think this is a barlet pear. I believe that's a barlet pear as well. And then we have 2 apple trees, and this one right here, this apple tree is going crazy with apples. I have no idea why it decided to have that many, but even some of the limbs are just dangling because it has, you know, 5 apples on one little tiny limb. And these look like they're doing really well too. I always thought I was a livestock animal guy, you know, growing all my own meat and super manly, you grow all your own meat, right? But no, I'm definitely a garden guy now. I love the garden. You know, there's like this stigma that gardening's for women and everything else is for the man on the farm, whatever. But that is so not the case. I love doing this. I've enjoyed it so much. So, you know, screw all the stigmas and saying, you know, what you should and shouldn't do in the world. If you're a guy, get into the garden. This thing is beautiful. It'll bring peace to you. It's wonderful. So I've enjoyed it so much, and it's been great being able to share with you guys what we got going, what we got growing. Yeah, what we got growing and going on. But you know, we haven't been making a lot of videos because, you know, we got married and, you know, we've been so busy on our rental and so many outside things. We've just been incredibly busy. So I'm glad I was able to get some time here today to kind of show you guys what we got going on in the garden, what we got growing on. And let me know down in the comments, what are you doing this year different than last year? What are you not liking about this year's garden? What, you know, are you having bug problems? Are you having watering issues? What's doing well? Let me know down in the comments. I'm curious how your gardens are doing. And thank you guys so much for watching. And it's been so long, it's nice to be back. And I can't promise that we're gonna be back to weekly videos just yet because I'm so busy off working on a rental every single day of the week. But I'm gonna do my best to get these videos out here because we love sharing our farm, our homestead with you guys, and it's just a wonderful, great way to connect with everybody. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you wanna see more videos like this, you can hit that subscribe button. Usually out the year we make about 1 a week, but you know, in the summertime, especially when we're busy like this, we just can't do it. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.